Chapter 14, 20 verses. We're going to be in Samson for a while now. We're at chapter 13 last week, introduction into Samson, chapter 14 today, all the way up to chapter 16. So he gets a chunk of weeks of teaching, which is going to be great. But today specifically, we're going to be kind of looking at like a little bit more of his life. Last week was more of an intro into who he's going to be, the Nazarite vow and stuff like that. And now it's more, he's growing up a little bit more, okay? So I've got my three sections. As usual, there we go. Section 1, the wife, the lion, and the honey, verses 1 through 9. So it says this, and Samson went down to Timnath and saw a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. And he came up and told his father and mother and said, I've seen a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me to wife. Then his father and his mother said unto him, Is there never a woman among the daughters of thy brethren, or among all the people, that thou goest to make a wife of the uncircumcised Philistines? And Samson said unto his father, Get her for me, for she pleaseth me well. For his father and his mother knew not that it was of the Lord that he sought an occasion against the Philistines, for at that time the Philistines had dominion over Israel. Then went Samson down, and his father and his mother, to Timnath, and came to the vineyards of Timnath, and behold, a young lion roared against him. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he rent him as he would have rent a kid. And he had nothing in his hand, but he told not his father or his mother what he had done. And he went down and talked with the woman, and she pleased Samson well. And after a time he returned to take her, and he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion. And behold, there was a swarm of bees and honey in the carcass of the lion. Verse 9, and he took thereof of his hands, and went on eating, and came to his father and mother, and he gave them, and they did eat, but he told them not that he had taken the honey out of the carcass of the lion. Okay, so section 1. Check out this map. We have Samson coming down to Timnath. So Eshtaol, where he was born, right there, Zorah, about 10 miles, I think they said, something away from this area. He walks to Timnah. Okay, and it's, standard little walk, as you can see. Nice little area. He goes and he checks out this lady. Isn't that the problem already? He's looking at girls, it's already gone downhill. Or anything about like the Israelis against the Philistines. There's a couple of rules. We're going to touch on those a little bit later on. But this kind of crosses over a couple of sections here. Because it seemed to be like Samson was struck with like love at first sight. He's like, woo, this girl is fine. I want her to be my wife. He saw this woman, wanted to marry her instantly. So he goes to Timnah, about 3 miles from Zorah, which is Samson's birthplace. He sees this woman. And in the east, kind of like they still do now, if you ask the Farouks, they're from Pakistan, obviously, they still talk about this, and Pastor Farouk and Tareem were in an organized marriage. This is that same thing, where he's going back to his parents and saying, set this marriage up. I want to be married to her. I want her. So he's requesting that they set up this marriage, basically. The issue here is Deuteronomy chapter 7, 1 through 3 tells us that the Philistines were not to be married specifically. So specifically verse 3, which says, basically, that they should not marry into the Philistines and dilute the kind of the Israelite family line, basically. But we see in verse 2, the desires of his heart comes out. There's a woman, I want her to be my wife. It's your job, Dad and Mum, to go make that happen. So make it happen. Please do that. And then there's this question, and it's a good thing, it's a good question, right? They're being good parents here. They're turning around and they're saying, oh, well, where's she from? Who is she? What's her background? Is there anyone else closer to home that you'd like to marry? It's all those things that parents should do, like a background check on their kids before they get married to a random person. Okay? No other woman, no one from your tribe, maybe a Danite woman perhaps, that'd be a little bit easier to have. But Samson turns around and says, nope, she pleases me well. She's right in my eyes. She looks great, she looks the part, she's beautiful, she's pleasing to me. That's why I want to marry her. So love at first sight is a powerful but dangerous thing. It is entirely possible for us to fall in love with someone that we have no business in falling in love with. that we should not be falling in love with, which is the case with Samson here, okay? Love at first sight feels wonderful, but it doesn't last. It's not something that is long-lasting. It's that impulse that, oh my goodness, this is amazing, and then it's gone. Then you realize who it is instead of what it is. Then you see kind of like the interior instead of just the exterior, you know? Samson right now is looking at this woman and going, wow, she's beautiful. Wow, she's beautiful. He doesn't know anything about her. He doesn't know anything about how she speaks, what she believes, where she lives, who she is. He knows that she's in Timnah. He knows she's of the Philistines, a daughter of the Philistines. That's it. But that should be enough, right? To not. Sometimes our lines get blurred there, you know? So, love at first sight is dangerous. But Samson said to his dad, verse 3, he said, get her for me, she pleases me well. Demanding a Philistine wife, Samson showed a disregard for his parents when they said, you should probably marry this person instead, someone closer, maybe someone from your same tribe. And then he's also disregarding God's will here as well. Deuteronomy 7, 3 and 4. Again, do not marry the Philistines. That is basically the command of like, wipe them out, get rid of them, do not marry them, do not allow them to be around. But he's bound by his heart, being led by his heart, and I think that's the problem. Command to the Israelites is to not intermarry with the pagan nations being people who believe in different gods. Applies to Christians today still, in that Christians should not really marry someone who's not a Christian because you're joining yourself to an unbeliever. This is a tough part. 2 Corinthians 6:14 tells us, be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers, for what have fellowship have righteousness with unrighteousness, and what communion have light with darkness. So what we're saying here is if they don't believe the same thing as you, don't expect them to do the same thing that you do. You know, it's like trying to put those two things together and not expect them to kind of dilute and change each other. That things will change, you know? And again, that's not always the case. You get those few moments where people are able to have good relationships and live and continue on, and it's great. But the Bible does say, do not be unequally yoked. It directly tells us to not do that. And it's not because those who aren't Christians aren't lovable. They're sometimes more lovable because they're open to so much more things, right? And it's not because they're not good enough or worthy of our love, but they are different because they do not understand the way of God, the law of God, who God is. Simple, because to be a Christian means Jesus Christ is the most important thing in your life. And when a Christian and a non-Christian get together, you have two people who are disagreeing on the most important thing. That's why. It's not because we're trying to be mean. It's not saying non-Christians aren't good enough, but their priorities are different. Are they going to pull you away from church? Are they going to stop you reading your Bible? Are they going to stop you from... And you'll find Christians do this as well, who don't truly believe in God. They pull people away from these situations. So it's not all, you know, we're not painting the same thing or the same thing here. But the point is, do not be unequally yoked, okay? So, I'm not going to hammer that anymore, just because I feel like I have. But notice here that Samson is already living a life of sin here, lusting after something that he shouldn't be lusting after. And God did use Samson mightily, like really mightily, but God used Samson despite his sin, not because of it. It's fair to suppose that God may have used Samson in a greater way if he had made himself a clean vessel. According to the principle of 2 Timothy 2, 20 and 21, it says, in a great house there are not only good vessels of gold and of silver, but also of wood and of earth, and some to honor and some to dishonor. If a man therefore purge himself from these, he shall be a vessel unto honor, sanctified and meet for the master's use, and prepared unto every good work. The vessel could be damaged, it would still do a job, just not as good of a job, right? If we're living a sinful life, we can't expect to be doing the best job for God. That's kind of what it's saying there, okay? Verse 4. But his father and his mother knew not that it was of the Lord that he sought an occasion against the Philistines, For at that time, the Philistines had dominion over Israel. So the Philistines are in control. Dominion. They're holding control over them, okay? But God's will was here, behind the scenes of Samson's desire to marry a Philistine woman. He's kind of pointing out here and leading the way. And his father and mother, Samson's father and mother, did not know that it was of God. It was of the Lord. So as the rest of the chapter shows, some good ultimately comes out of this ungodly marriage. Many Philistines were killed, and they were kept off balance in their attempts to dominate the Israelites. But it's kind of a weird way that God uses Samson in this, right? So, none of it, though, justifies Samson's actions. God can still, though, make even the evil of man to serve his purposes. It never justifies, however, the evil. You know, we are still doing sin. God can still turn it for good, but we are still sinning. And God's seeking an occasion to move against the Philistines. In accomplishing this, God did not make a reluctant Samson pursue the Philistine woman for marriage. God allowed Samson to do what he wanted to do. There's free will here, but God used it. Right? So this is where people sometimes get a little bit confused, because I read this verse and I read like 3 or 4 different commentaries, and they're like, this is why free will is not a thing. And I'm like, no, actually it is a thing, because he didn't stop Samson. He didn't say, I told you so, I told you so, I told you so, now stop. He went, I told you so, I told you so, I told you so. Okay, well, you're going to do it anyway. I'm still going to try and make something good out of this. That's a big thing here. It's not God who's all controlling and all, I'm going to dictate. It's God saying, well, you're going to make your mistakes, but I'm going to make something good come out of this. For God's will, not for Samson's will, right? And I think that's the whole point here. God allowed Samson to do what he wanted. The act itself was sinful. God allowed it for reasons in both Samson's life and for reasons on a larger scale to impact Israel. And that's a big point here. We might try to justify that today by saying, oh, I want to marry a non-Christian because Samson did it and look what good came out of that. Things may work out that way, but even though God used Samson's marriage to a Philistine woman, it came at a great cost. There was a great cost, and we'll read about that. We'll read about the way that he continues to fall. Because Samson's life, man, it's tough. I love Samson because, again, God is using an imperfect person to do his plans and be part of his plans here. It's the same reason why I like David. David is a sinner, but knows who God is. Samson is a sinner, knows who God is, but still chooses sometimes to ignore that. He's more like a human being than a lot of other people in the Bible are, because he's just so far from perfect. But then right at the end, you get that huge hurrah from Samson, and we're going to read about that, and it's one of my favorite moments. But the point being is, like, it takes a long time for him to get to that, of like, wow, now I know who God is, and I should be living this way. We shouldn't justify things because the Bible does this already. Doesn't mean it's going to be different for us. You know, sin's still sin. Unequally yoked is still unequally yoked. God's law is still God's law. So verses 5 to 9, Samson slays a lion and eats some wild honey. So verse 5, he comes to the vineyards of Timnah. So Timnah again, he's over here, chilling right here. Samson was dedicated to God, if you remember the last chapter, with a lifelong vow of a Nazarite. Why is he in a vineyard? What are Nazarites not allowed to do? What are they not allowed to do? Go for it. Drink wine. What's in a vineyard? Grapes that lead to wine, right? You know, they're going to have that treading post. They're going to have all the things to set up and make wine here. He wasn't allowed to eat anything off of the vine either. No raisins, no grapes, drinking wine, stuff like that. Why are you in a vineyard, Samson? What are you doing, man? You are just tempting yourself. And that's not a good way to live, okay? It doesn't make any sense. But you can see that. Samson was dedicated to God with a lifelong vow of Nazarite, Judges 13, 4-5, as Scott taught last week. But Nazarites were to have nothing to do with grape products in any form, okay? In any form. Numbers 6, 3-4, okay? Samson was dangerously close to compromise here. It's weird. It's such a funny thing. It's like opening yourself up and letting the devil get a little bit of a foothold in your life by just getting into those situations, you know. And we all have those situations. We all have our temptations. We all have our sin. Don't open yourself up to those things. Be wise when you go like, hey, should I be in this situation or not? Should I be hanging around with these people? Should I be doing this type of thing? Should I be doing, think about it. Think about how it affects you spiritually, not just physically, because that's a huge part here, okay? And verse 6, we can read that a lion comes on the scene, okay? Verse 5, a young lion roared against him. Verse 6, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him. So, the lion's there, roaring, roar. Samson's like, oh no, a lion. And then God's like, Spirit, huh. And then it says, he rent him as he would have rent a kid and had nothing in his hand. So he had no weapons. And he just went and wrecked this fool. Absolutely destroyed this lion. He tore the lion apart as one would tear apart a young goat. That's what some commentaries say, and I'm like, what? Have you torn apart a young goat? Do you know how one of those, that's a pretty brutal comparison there, but Samson's flirting with temptation in this vineyard, with his impending marriage, with the vineyards of Timnah, but he had this miraculous strength come from the Spirit of the Lord upon him to stop him from getting killed by this lion. A few things to think about here. In Hebrew, the word used for lion here is a lion in the prime of his youth. So the strongest it will be, the most energetic it will be, the most aggressive it would be over territory. That would be when it was trying to take down the top dog. They come and challenge for the alpha lion, situation. So that's what it's saying there. The strongest, aggressive, athletic, youthful lion here. And the wild mountains of Judah were places where such animals or beasts of scripture typically lived. So Samson's rending and killing of the animal was accomplished in this place where there was danger around. And it was almost like he had superhuman strength, that he was able just to rip this lion apart. And you see, I don't know if you guys have seen this before or looked before, if you type in Samson and the lion and click on Google Images, they have this thing, he's just pulling the jaws apart like it's nothing. This is crazy, But in the previous chapter, we can read that the Spirit of the Lord was on Samson. We can see that in verse 25 of chapter 13, and the Spirit of the Lord began to move him at times in the camp of Dan between Zorah and Eshtaol. So we have the Spirit of the Lord here, and here it is again, focusing on strength, focusing on keeping him alive. And then we have verse 7. And he went down and he talked with the woman, and she pleased Samson well. Should she be talking? Should he be talking? Should they be talking? Was there a Bible width apart the whole time? Were they? Was there enough room for Jesus?
His mom and dad were there.
His mom and dad were there, okay. But she pleased Samson well. You can notice that a couple of times this phrase keeps getting thrown in there. The talking between Samson and a woman was rare and typically would have been limited in Eastern culture unless they were betrothed. So you can see that there's already something happening because they're allowed to talk. Mom and dad are around. We're going to get married anyway. We're allowed to talk because they're kind of chaperoning us, okay? But she pleased Samson well. There's again this idea that she just looks really good. I like her, falling madly in love with her. She's beautiful to the eye, It doesn't mean that she's a good woman. Just because the looks are there does not mean she's a good woman. It is possible to fall in love with someone who is actually very wrong for us, okay? Proverbs 4:23 says, keep, or literally guard or protect your heart with all diligence, for out of it springs the issues of life. Basically, if we don't guard our hearts, we can end up in trouble. If we find that we're already in love with the wrong person, the only thing to do is to give them up. Give them up. Because it's right before God. Jesus told us that following him would require that we give up the things we love the most, especially if they try and pull you away. That's Mark 10:29-30. And we look at verse 8. After a time. So, after a time, you can usually see that there's been a progression of time here that's come by. Usually this would be around a year. So the first initial contact for betrothal would be like and then they would wait a year. So a year-long engagement almost, where the families would basically be like, oh, if you want to get married, we should trade, we should become best friends, you want some goats, you want my daughter's hand, then I'm going to rinse you dry of all of your livestock. That's kind of what would happen back then, you know? So Samson is on his way down to go pick up his wife now, after some time, and he finds the carcass of the lion that he killed, that he tore in half or rent. And bees have made their home inside of the body. What's the issue here? As a Nazarite, what's the issue? You got it? You remember? As a dead body, what's the issue?
Oh, you're not allowed to touch dead bodies.
As a Nazarite, you are not allowed to touch dead bodies. If you did, what would happen? They'd get those old buzzers and clippers out and they'd buzz you, and you'd have to spend a long time cleaning your body, like Levitical law kind of standard again of like squeaky clean. But he goes over and he's like, oh, look at that, I killed that lion. Oh, why is it buzzing? And he goes and just puts his hand inside and scoops out some honey and is like, ha, dead lion honey, awesome. Chows down on it. Walks back to his mom and dad. Want some honey? Do you want some? They're like, oh, you got some honey? Yeah, we'll try some of that. It's kind of funny, right? He's like bringing them into his issue, into his sin here. When Samson gathered the honey from the dead carcass of a lion, he expressly violated his Nazarite vow, which told him basically a Nazarite should never touch a dead body or a carcass. Numbers 6, 6 and 7. And it says, number 6, 6 and 7, all the days that he separated himself unto the Lord, he shall come at no dead body. He shall not make himself unclean, for his father... Oh, did he just give honey from a dead body to his father? Yeah, he's messed that up. Or for his mother... Oh yeah, right there as well, okay. For his brother and his sister when they die, because the consecration of his God is upon his head. That is a big deal. He's made a vow. Are you keeping your word, Samson, or are you messing up here? Significantly, Samson did this after he was filled with the Holy Spirit, which tells you what? There is a thing called free will. Just because you're filled with the Holy Spirit does not mean you live a good and perfect life. Just because God has filled you with His Spirit does not mean we can't mess up. It means we've been given an opportunity to do what's right. We've been given the power to do what's right. And now we've also been given the choice to do what's right. Will you do what's right? Will you please God with the way that you live? Verse 9, and he took thereof and the honey in his hands and went on eating, came to his father and mother, and he gave them, and he did eat. But he did not tell them that he had taken the honey out of the carcass of the lion. Now I can imagine this picture. Samson's walking back up and he's like, hey mom, hey dad. And they're like, what are you doing? I want to go some honey over here. You want some honey? And they're like, oh cool, where'd you get it? And he's like, bees. Just bees? Yeah, bees. Don't ask about it. Honey. They eat some honey. This sounds kind of familiar to you? There's some really nice fruit here. Adam, come and eat this fruit. Yeah, little connections going on between the Garden of Eden and Samson here with his mum and dad. Samson did not tell his parents where he got the honey from because he knew it was a compromise. Because he knew it was a sin of his Nazarite vow. Meaning that Samson knew what he was doing, that he had free will to do it. Samson had consecration, at least the appearance of it, without communion, okay? This was only good for the sake of image. On the outside, he looked like he was doing the part. On the inside, he knew that he was doing things wrong. Some things to think about here, and then we'll jump into section 2. Samson brought the honey first to those nearest to him, not keeping it to himself. That was nice. No, the honey's bad. You shouldn't be doing that, okay? Sometimes the sweet things that we have in life aren't actually good for you. They are sin. They are things that we should not be taking part. Do not be drugged in by other people, okay? Second thing here, Samson brought his honey in his hands the simplest way. There's no complexity. There's no containers. It was right here, easy to access. Scoop it up and take it. Sometimes it's that easy to fall. It really is. And then Samson brought... This is the part that kind of frustrates me here. Samson brought the honey modestly, not boasting about killing the lion, because he knew that he had done wrong. He knew that he found it in a dead body. He knew that it broke the law. He knew the vow was going to be broken there, and that he had actually led his family into committing a sin there as well. your sin can lead other people into sin. You need to be watching what you're doing around other people as well. Okay? Section 2. The feast and the riddle, verses 10 to 14, says this. So the father went down unto the woman, and Samson made there a feast, for so used the young men to do. And it came to pass, when they saw him, they brought 30 companions to be with him. And Samson said unto them, I will now put forth a riddle unto you. If you can certainly declare it with me within the 7 days of the feast, and find it out, then I will give you 30 sheets and 30 changes of garments. And if you cannot declare it to me, then shall you give me 30 sheets and 30 changes of garments. And they said unto him, Put forth thy riddle, that we may hear it. Verse 14. And he said unto them, Out of the eater came forth meat, and out of the strong came forth sweetness. And they could not in 3 days expound the riddle. Okay. Samson had a bachelor party. All his buddies came by. And we find out his father went down. Indication here that Samson's family were pretty wealthy. How do we know this? Any ideas? Go for it.
Because they were able to have a party.
For how many people?
Didn't it say 40?
30 people. For how many days?
7.
7 days. For 30 people, plus Samson and his family. That's a lot of people. That's a lot. Okay? That's a breakfast, lunch, dinner, water, food, drink, all of it. Entertainment for 7 days. That's crazy. They had some money. This verse also tells us that they stuck to the custom where the groom and the father and the family of the groom were responsible for the cost of this by the mention of the father here, okay? And they gave a feast, and obviously there was a lot of drinking there. A little bit of a, might even be a mind-blowing situation here. It's real easy to invite people to a party. It doesn't mean they're your friends. Mm-hmm. Who you surround yourself with is a really important thing here as well, okay? Samson did a feast. There was drinking, and there's a vineyard, and there's grapes, and there's lions, and there's dead carcasses. Samson is on the edge every single moment throughout this whole account of scripture of him breaking the Nazirite law over and over and over again. Have you noticed that? He's that kid that's and you're like, stop touching me, and he's like, I'm not touching you, I'm like this close. You ever had that annoying kid in your life and That's what Samson's doing here. He's almost crossing the line, but he's, The wedding festivities lasted a week. The men and women usually were entertained in separate areas. We can remember in Esther, when the king was getting married and the queen was in a separate room, that was the same thing that would happen here, okay? And in verse 11, it tells us he brought 30 companions to be with him. They brought 30 companions to be with him. It was not and is not difficult, again, to get many people to come to a party. It does not mean that they're friends. What it's saying here is that he was surrounding himself with people that they brought with him. We don't know who they are. So the father went down to the woman, and Samson made a feast there, as the young men do. And it came to pass when they saw him, that they brought 30 companions. Who are they? But they just invited 30 people to come party. That doesn't tell you friendship. That doesn't tell you good things. That just tells you people are just there to use you and for good times. Verses 12 to 14, Samson poses a riddle concerning the lion and the honey. He offered 30 shirts and 30 changes of garments as a reward. These 30 shirts or changes of clothes would be like a fine suit of clothes one would wear to an important occasion. So it'd be it's good clothes. It's not just stuff you go, farming in, or it's high-end stuff. The best suit and tie, But 30 of them. 30 different suits, It's like betting this friendly wager over a riddle, a bit of fun, why not? Let's have a little laugh, and then boom, blown out of proportion, And if you get it, you get this prize, and if not, I get the prize from you. And you're like, oh, all of us? You're going to buy 30 people? Well, yeah, one suit for every single one of them. But if you don't get it, I get 30 suits from you guys, one suit each. And they agreed. And Samson shared the riddle. The riddle was, out of the eater came forth meat, and out of the strong came forth sweetness. So close to rhyming. So close. But this is a clever riddle, and Samson showed that even though he was weak morally, he wasn't weak intellectually. He put something forth like, hey, work it out. And they couldn't. 3 days passed without answer. Okay? Which leads us to section 3, verse 15 to 20, the answer and Samson's revenge. Okay, it says this, and it came to pass on the 7th day that they said unto Samson's wife, entice thy husband, that he may declare unto us the riddle, lest we burn thee and thy father's house with fire. Have you called us to take what we have? Is it not so? And Samson's wife wept before him and said, thou dost but hate me and lovest me not. Thou hast put forth a riddle unto the children of the people, and thou hast not told me. And he said unto her, behold, I have not told it to my father, nor my mother, and shall I tell it thee? And she wept before him the 7 days while their feast lasted, and it came to pass on the 7th day that he told her, because she lay sore upon him, and she told the riddle to the children of the people. And the men of the city said unto him on the 7th day, before the sun went down, what is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion? And he said unto them, if ye had not plowed with my heifer, ye had not found out my riddle. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon, and slew 30 men of them, and took their spoil, and gave change of garments and unto them which expounded the riddle. And his anger was kindled, and he went up to his father's house. But Samson's wife was given to his companion, whom he had used as his friend. Right, lots of stuff going on here. First things first, though, Samson's wife gets a little bit crazy, and she tries to manipulate, and succeeds, Verse 15, we have the Philistines wanting the answer so bad, they're just begging. Start to beg, then you go to try to entice, then to kind of threaten. It's kind of funny, right? If you don't give us the answer, if you don't give us it, we'll burn your house down and your father's house. That's kind of scary. That's pretty scary right there. We're not here to be taken advantage of. We're not here to lose. Do you think we're losers? You're here just to take stuff from us? What do you think this is? This is meant to be a party. So then Samson's wife goes to Samson, verse 16, and wept on him. And wept on him day after day after day after day after day after day after day. 7 days crying until she wept sore. So sad, so sore, so weak. And Samson was like, oh, okay. His wife knew how to manipulate situation and how to make herself a burden to her husband until she got what she wanted. He told her because she pressed him so much. And I think it's funny because he says, she said, do you not love me? Do you not love me? And he turns around and he says, I haven't even told my dad. I haven't even told my mom. Why would I tell you if I haven't even told them? I've known them a lot longer. We've just gotten married. We're in the 7-day festival of our marriage. I've known them a lot longer. But she cries and she cries and she cries. The willingness of Samson's Philistine wife to side with her people against Samson shows a fundamental weakness in their marriage. Huge weakness. She did not fulfill the idea essential to marriage of leaving one's father and mother to be joined in one flesh. Genesis 2:24 says, therefore shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. That idea is you marry someone because they equal you out. They don't tear you away. They don't bring you down. You build each other up. That's the big difference about being unequally yoked compared to being equally yoked, okay? You can also see Matthew 19:5, the same. It's just quoting that again. And this shows why it was wrong for Samson to marry a Philistine. We cannot expect someone who does not love the God of Israel to build a marriage on God's principles. Again, we've mentioned in 2 Corinthians 6:14 about being unequally yoked. We cannot expect a non-believer to live the life of a believer. Nazarenes were ancient Jewish people who worshipped Yahweh. Numbers 6:1-13. But we can read in history that the Philistines worshipped multiple different gods, and goddesses, including Dagon, Baal, Astarte, and Asherah. Very similar, Scott's hammered these a fair few times, to the Canaanite gods, all lowercase g's, of course. So we're going to look through some pictures. Okay, so first one. We have Dagon, the fish god of the Philistines. Basically a mermaid. A merman, sorry. He has a beard.
He's got a very short tail.
Short tail, turban, beard, merman. Okay? So, again, these are Philistine gods that were worshipped back then. They were quite similar to Canaanite gods. So remember what we said about different tribes and different people groups would have the same god. They would just change one aspect and the name, and they'd be like, new god, yay. This is another thing here. So, god of the sea, the idea of like, people going fishing, pray to Dagon, he'll give you good fish, he'll give you, let you catch a lot of them, you'll come home with a great load of fish ready to feed everyone, okay? Next one, Baal, the fertility god of the Philistines. Interestingly enough, this is the one that they sacrificed children to so they could have more children. Makes no sense, but it would happen, okay? Third one here, Astarte, the fertility and sex god of the Philistines. Before marriage, before having sex, to be like, I want to get pregnant, let's pray and sacrifice to Astarte, the god of fertility, the god of sex, so that this would be productive. Crazy, right? But they would do it. And then this one, anyone know who this is? Come on, it's real easy to tell, right? The Asherah, the mother god of the Philistines. She was the one they would compare to Yahweh. She was the one that would go, you have the God of Israel, we have Asherah, the mother god. That's kind of crazy. But everyone has their one, right? Everyone has the one they look to. They just don't know that all their gods, lowercase gods, waste of breath, waste of life, waste of goods, waste of crops, waste of prayers, waste of hope, waste of faith. That's the sad truth here. So we have the reason why we look at an unequally yoked marriage and what happens if that happens is because when you're worshipping something different to Yahweh, to God, to Jesus Christ, and you're saying, oh, Asherah, instead of God, they're not the same. You're not the same. Your priorities are not the same. There's a couple of reasons why I think Samson's wife sided with the group. First one was the threat. We'll burn your house down, we'll burn your father's house. No one likes to be threatened, okay? But think about this. She doesn't know what Samson did to the lion. But if she truly trusted her husband, she would have told her husband and he would have dealt with this, okay? But apparently she didn't feel safe enough to tell him or trust him enough to tell him. But he was her best safety in this situation. And then Samson fires back with verse 18. When they've given him the answer, and he said, and if ye had said unto them, if ye had not ploughed with my heifer, ye had not found out my riddle. What's a heifer?
Cow.
A cow, right? What do they use to carry ploughs and pull ploughs in the fields?
Cow.
And oxen, and cows and heifers, right? And that's the funny thing about this. He's using a riddle here that they would know. Well,
Terminology.
Yeah, the terminology that they know, like agricultural terminology, basically. Yeah. Samson's use of this proverb showed the anger and bitterness he felt at being manipulated. Samson's wife had won what she thought about through manipulation, but lost her husband's heart. When a man gives into his wife's manipulations to keep peace, it almost always builds anger and resentment, guilt in the relationship. Yeah, bitterness, yeah. Manipulation is tempting because it works, but it always really brings destruction. It doesn't work out in the long run, so don't do it, okay? Metaphor of plowing with my heifer is farming. Oxen's, cows, heifers are employed to drag the plow. If you basically hadn't used my wife, then you wouldn't have got the answer. That's basically what he's saying here. And then we look here finally at Samson's revenge again, his anger and the revenge. So Samson went down to Ashkelon, which was about 24 miles west by southwest from Timnah. When they did the breakdown of all the land, the promised land, remember right on the end here, along the coast was all the Philistines. That was their land. So notice he's gone from the land of Benjamin over here, the land of Dan right here, and he's gone into Philistia, the Philistine area. And when you know what? I'm going into enemy territory, and I'm going to take their fine clothes and give you their fine clothes. Samson went crazy here and was like, okay, you won. Fair play, well done. Clap. And then he went to Ashkelon, 24 miles. It's not a small walk. Spirit of the Lord came on him again. Verse 19, okay? Spirit of the Lord did not come upon Samson to avenge the hurt feelings of a husband, but instead God's strategy was larger. He was looking to make a move, to an occasion to move against the Philistines, as he read in Judges 14:4. So he used this occasion to pour out his spirit on Samson to fight against the Philistines. Right? And he kills 30 of the people. He slew 30 men of them and took their spoil and gave change of garments unto them, which expounded the riddle. And his anger was kindled, and he went up to his father's house. Okay? So he killed them, took their stuff, paid the bet off, you know. He paid the bet off, but he did it at their own expense. Well, this label in the back here says made in Philistia. Where'd you get this stuff from again? He's like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. He killed 30 of those enemies of Israel, gave their garments to satisfy the debt. The difference here is, again, custom of stripping an enemy after killing them wasn't something that happened. Like, the Hebrews did not do that because they weren't trying to dishonor people after death. It wasn't like they were just trying to take things they didn't. It would usually be like earrings or necklaces, or if God told them to do so. This was a little bit different. Samson did this to fulfill his riddle, but he did something that wasn't quite heard of before in the Bible, okay? And in verse 20, Samson's wife was given to his companion, whom he had used as his friend. Samson won the battle, lost the war. The wife won the riddle, lost the husband. You see this? There's a win, there's a loss. There's a win, there's a loss. His wife left him and went to be with his best man. That's kind of what's saying here. Samson was at fault for not guarding his heart against falling in love with a woman he had no business falling in love with. He was at fault for not founding the marriage on godly principles, on God's promises. He was also at fault for not responding to his wife's manipulations with love instead of anger. At the same time, though, Samson's wife was at fault for siding with others against her husband. And she was at fault for not telling her husband what the real problem was, the threat, remember? And she was at fault for manipulating her husband by crying and crying until she got her way. And then finally, you can see that she gave up on the marriage there. Because it says that she was given to a companion, this idea of like she went and left.
It says in that 15 verse 2 that her father gave her to.
Yeah, and that's the crazy part. Given away, gone. So I think this is the whole point here. The warnings are there from the start. God told the Israelites to not marry Philistines, to not do it. But Samson let his heart lead, and it led to heartbreak. Listen to God. Listen to his guiding, to the Spirit. Scott taught on this last week. I will repeat it again. Jeremiah 17:9. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? The heart will lead you astray. The heart will lead to what you think is right, but it doesn't mean it's right. The heart will trick you. The heart will pull you this way and that. This is the tough part, because you go, it's not all, when we say like, hey, it's not all about head knowledge, it's about heart knowledge. That's about Jesus Christ. But when it's of the world, you cannot trust your heart. That's chapter 14 right there. I've got 3 final thoughts for you. Okay? First one, a vow is a vow. Are you a man of your word? Samson had that Nazirite vow spoken over him. He would have known about it because he would be living that way. Yet he tempted that line so many times. Do you guys call yourselves Christians and then push the line a little bit? Well, I'm Christians, but it's okay if I curse a little bit. I'm one of those cool Christians. I'm Christian, but it's okay if I drink a little bit. One of those cool Christians. If I speed a little bit, smoke some drugs, do whatever, sleep around, whatever it is. Could be small, could be big. If you claim to be a Christian, that means you're making a vow to be following Jesus Christ. Are you being a man of your word, a person of your word? Are you living up to that? Don't be tempted. Don't push that line. Don't push that line. The Bible has clear boundaries for a reason. Okay? Stick to them. Do not be unequally yoked. Point 2 here. This is a funny one because even I find this, and I've mentioned this before, I do jiu-jitsu, I go to the gym a couple of times a week. And when people go up to me and go, Jamie, how are you doing? And I go, oh yeah, I'm just tired, works, blah, 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 a little bit like this. And they go, oh, this is what you should do. And I'm like, oh yeah, sure, yeah. And in my head I'm like, I'm not listening to this. Like, you don't believe in Jesus. You're going to give me worldly advice. You're not going to give me biblical advice. Do not invite in advice from the world. It might seem good on top, but if it's not from the Bible, it's not from God, don't do it. Go to people who have been following Jesus their life. Go to people who you can trust, who have been pursuing Christ their whole lives, and look to them and say, how did you get through this? Tell me in the Bible what verses you rely on. What helps you get through anxiety? What helps you get through depression? What helps you get through feeling lonely? Whatever it is, tell me. Don't go to the world for that. Do not be unequally yoked. And then even when you get to relationships, that boyfriend, that girlfriend, that wife, that husband, whatever it is, if they're not following the Lord, do not expect that to change in the future. This whole marriage to win them to Christ might be a really good idea because they're hot. I really like the look of them. They're great people. It doesn't always work out. Don't be sucked into that false belief that you could be the one, the answer. Jesus is the answer. You are not the answer, okay? The third one. Do not expect the world to follow the law of God. This is a tough one because I've done this and I've said to Rachel a couple of times, I'm like, man, I just don't know why this person acts this way. And she'll be like, because they don't know Jesus. Like, yeah, but they're just so stupid. Why aren't they living this way instead? Because they don't know Jesus. I always think about Pharaoh and Moses. And I think, oh, Pharaoh, you know what you were doing was bad. It was bad that you were keeping all those slaves. It was bad that you weren't letting them go free. It was bad that all this stuff was happening. But that he didn't know Jesus. So how would he know any different? So when Moses says, hey, you got to follow God, why? He didn't know God. Why would I expect him to act any differently? Why am I putting my biblical principles into your life and expecting you to live that way without you knowing God? It doesn't work. The best thing we can do as Christians is to live it out, to show and be a good role model to those around us. Keep your vows. If you're a Christian, be a Christian. Simple as. Men, be men of your words. Women, be women of your words. But be what you say you are. That sounds really funny. Don't be half and half. Don't be lukewarm. Okay? Don't be unequally yoked. Life partners, boyfriend, fiance, wife, husband, girlfriend, whatever it is. Do not be unequally yoked. Marry someone who is going to point you to Jesus, not pull you away. Okay? And don't expect the world to follow God. Because they don't. They hate God. They are pulling further and further away from God. Don't expect them to change just because you're a good person.